Hello, family. Today, our guest is Sanford D. Greenberg. Now, let me tell you, I had not met Sandy before this podcast, but I felt as though I know him. I read his book, and I'm going to hold it up here for you. I'll hold it up a lot. And you see all my sticky notes. It is one of the most inspiring books I've ever read, and I've read a lot, thousands of books, and it really was the COVID saver for me. I'm going to read about Sandy first, and then I'm going to share some personal thoughts with you before he joins us for this conversation. Sanford Greenberg is chairman of board of governors of the Johns Hopkins University's Wilmer Eye Institute. Now, that's the largest clinical and research enterprise in ophthalmology in the United States. He's also a fellow of American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. As a trustee emeritus of the Johns Hopkins University and Johns Hopkins Medicine, he incorporates much of his gifts to the School of Medicine and the hospital, because you see, he lost his eyesight to a disease during his junior year in college. Yet he graduated with his class the following year, elected as class president. In 2012, my now friend Sandy instituted a campaign and prize for research toward eradicating blindness among humankind. It's called End Blindness by 2020. This effort gained international recognition in 2014 when it was granted a featured session on the agenda of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where Dr. Greenberg has been a regular participant. President Clinton gave him appointments. He served as chairman of the Rural Healthcare Corporation, created by Congress to bring benefits of telemedicine to America's rural areas. He also served under President Carter and Ford. And, you know, he was a White House fellow in the Johnson administration. He's been giving and gifting to our world and our country for ever since he's been a young man. And he's also co-editor of the book, The Presidential Advisory System. In it, he discusses the methods used by American presidents to obtain policy advice for the management of the federal government. Sandy's career as an inventor, entrepreneur, and investor began when he invented and patented a compressed speech machine. That speech machine speeds up the reproduction of words from recordings without distorting any of the sound. He found several enterprises, including a company that produced specialized computer simulators, and one that created the world's largest electronic laboratory surveillance network and antimicrobial profiling database. Wow, right? Well, he also received his BA as Phi Beta Kappa from Columbia University in 1962 and earned both his MA and PhD from Harvard, his MBA from Columbia University, and is a Marshall Scholar at Oxford University. He attended Harvard Law School, lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife, Sue, and they have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. I am so excited to introduce you to my new friend, Sandy. And as promised, we are so honored, family, to have Sanford D. Greenberg here with us. Mr. Greenberg, right now I'm wearing a t-shirt and a sweatshirt, actually, and it has the picture of Ruth Bader Ginsburg on it, and it says women belong in all the places where decisions are made. Ruth Bader Ginsburg also had something else to say. She had it to say about you. And although we are going to be going through your life story as told in this beautiful book, I really wanted to make sure that our audience understood that you have quite a story to share, and they have to get your book. We're going to talk about it, but they're just going to have to get it. So before we jump into the book, can you just tell us a little bit about you growing up? I've already shared some of the highlights of your life we'll dig into. I reserved your childhood for you to talk about.
Thank you. My childhood was both a barren field, but at the same time, rich with an understanding of what probity and integrity and generosity really meant. And in that instance, I'm referring to the 4 people with whom I lived when I was born and as a young child. My father, Albert, escaped Nazi Germany in 1939, came to this country penniless, was a good tailor, a very good one, and struggled to earn a living to support us. One day he put me in the chair at the center of a room and suspended a stick of gum over it. And as he dropped it, he said, "This is coming from heaven." Those sweet moments vanished all too soon because at age 5, when I was 5, he died, and his death really devastated me. Moreover, he had left my mother, Sarah, with $54 to raise 3 children under the age of 5. My mother went to a social service agency to solicit their help, and they acknowledged her situation and offered to help in any way that they could if my mother would separate her 3 children and put them into 3 separate orphanages. That would not happen because my mother would let nothing interfere with the integrity of her family. She was a quiet woman, deliberate, resolute, thoughtful. She was a sweet inside and tough on the outside, what the Israelis call a sabra. She had the skin for grimness, which unfortunately followed her through her entire life. Some years later, she married my father, Carl. Carl was a junk dealer and more powerful and stronger than I was or could ever be. One day, a disgruntled employee threw a brick at him, catching him in the eye. That required a prosthetic. Carl was made of iron because he had to be. And similarly to the story with Carl, my grandmother Pauline was babysitting in Poland at age 8, and a spring from a cradle burst into her eye, and she too required a prosthetic. It was somewhat of an obscene irony given what happened in my life. But she was an amazing woman. You felt as though you weren't worthy of being close to her. You felt anointed when you were able to hug her. You left feeling much stronger and more powerful. Her death took something sacred from me, but also left something sacred too. These 4 mighty pillars in my early years sustained me. And while they had little time to play games with me, I sensed a sense of love that I have never encountered since. And what they taught me had nothing to do with what they said. It had everything to do with what they did. My father, Carl, for example, had come over from Germany in the mid-30s, And when the war began, he started trying to bring members of his family from suffering the consequences of the Holocaust. The time alone that I had could be viewed as somewhat nerve-wracking, but I became a licensed dreamer in those early years because that's what I had. My brother Joel was a year and a half younger than I, so not having anyone to talk with and having no technology whatsoever in the house, I was left to my own devices and I was left to dream. And that has lasted me a lifetime. I still have my license to be a dreamer.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg says about you that when you account for your good life, you have something that sighted people cannot possess with the same intensity. Sandy calls it his informed life within the mind, a mind which thoughts proliferate and assemble undisturbed by the constant flow of visual sense images. Tell us about that.
As you can imagine, I live most of my life inside my head, which is a very noisy and busy place, but also one that's filled with joy, because there is the stillness, because there were no images. There are no images to distract me, as Justice Ginsburg said. And so there's my mind, and beyond that, the entire universe. And I wander in that universe on a regular basis.
Before we get into the meat of the book, there's one more thing that Justice Ginsburg says. She says that from a hospital bed in Detroit in February of 1961, your sightless eyes were moist with medication and you made a deal with God. You said if the Lord would get you out of this hole, you vowed you'd do all you could to prevent others from going through grief like this in the future. How did you get to that place so quickly? And quickly I say with hesitation, because one's life can't be measured by someone else's sense of time. But when we look at what you went through, that was a bold commitment to God you made.
Yes, it did not happen the first day or the second day after I had lost my eyesight, but having plenty of time to think, my mother sitting my bedside. It was simply within me to promise God, given that I began to understand the implications of my new blindness, that I had to do something to commit so that no one else would have to go through blindness. It was an adolescent, naive, perhaps insane promise, but that's what I made to God. And obviously I was in no place to fulfill the promise for many, many years.
And you were on a train when a man came up to you and asked to sit beside you, even though the train was pretty empty. And it turns out that he was a doctor himself. And he began to talk about his practice. And in the conversation with you, he noticed your eyes tearing and he referred to your eyes as broken. Can you share with us how that impacted you and what that did for you? I mean, certainly they're going to read your book, but they've got to hear your voice to it.
Well, having broken eyes, and you're referring particularly to that train ride with which I opened the book, I hadn't yet understood the consequences of the misdiagnosis of my allergic conjunctivitis, so-called. So I was on the precipice of beginning to realize that my eyes were truly broken. Actually, they were simply dead.
My sister, Trish, who I talk about a lot in both of my books and publicly, although she's a very private person, she wrote to me. When I read that occurrence for you, I started feeling so much in the beginning of this book. My sister Trish has Crohn's disease, and she sought doctor's care for several years in North Carolina. And I must say, North Carolina medicine has picked up a lot since then. But Trish had the misfortune of being an African-American woman who had an illness, and she went online and started to ask questions. Is it possible I have Crohn's? Finally, in frustration, after asking one doctor more than one time, is it possible she had Crohn's, he told her, you can't, you're not Jewish. And she went misdiagnosed for years. She has had several surgeries. Thankfully, when she came to California, we actually went to a Jewish doctor who told her, in fact, she did have Crohn's, and that the history of our people in this country is one that is married to many people. And Trish, and if you saw Trish, you would understand that she is not a dark-skinned, very curly-haired African-American woman, anything to the contrary. So the diagnosis, I think, was made rather crudely. When you talked about being misdiagnosed, you certainly brought me to what happened for my sister and how she went through years of illness. We're thankful she's alive today, but she's had a very rough medical history and continues with Crohn's, as you may know, to require treatment. But there's so many people being misdiagnosed just medically, not even talking about the greater social conversation here. Your writing this book is reaching out to a lot of people and sharing the importance of medicine in our lives and diagnosis in our lives. Have you been bitter since then, since those early days about misdiagnosis?
I would say that I'd say two things. It was certainly an option, but I chose not to go down that path. Harry Truman said, I have no time for bitterness, which I think is a much better approach to life. And on a more spiritual level, if you become bitter or angry or petty or jealous, I believe that you lose your divinity. And it is similarly important for us to remember that we are divine.
When you talk about learning that in 1934, your family had moved from Poland to Cologne, Germany, thinking it would be a place of enlightenment, they continued that journey on to the United States via Paris. What did that feel like to have history made so personal in your family?
Well, it left a permanent stain on my psyche because to this day, it is inconceivable to think about what happened in the Holocaust. That's obvious. But the personal pain that I know some of the members of my family experienced has never left me, nor do I think it ever will. I think what happened was not only painful for me, but I think it was one of the most horrific things that civilization has ever experienced and will never get over it.
I fully agree with you. I visited some of those concentration camps, and at one of them, I was standing in front of ovens, and I was with a client, and the client took several of us, and we were standing there, and we were told to imagine watching what was happening to the people, a person in front of us. My own experience in my life has not been the easiest journey, but reading your book really helped me to appreciate that. And I lived early in California on Venice Beach. Are you familiar with Venice Beach?
Yes.
Well, if I drive down Venice Boulevard from Venice Beach, there is an Old Helms bakery. And back when I would go there, it had not yet been renovated to the state it is now. And over the door, it had engraved, "Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it." I think that, as in my case, when I talk about slavery or I talk about civil rights, very often I can see people's faces go uncomfortable. And especially now that the conversation on social justice is so broad with the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, these conversations. And then we're also having spikes of Asian harm being done to older people. How can what you've experienced and what you teach in this book be made better, broader by those of us who want to push that message forward on these are very unnecessary, these being very unnecessary acts of humans against other humans? We've not learned that yet. We've done things that would seem incredible. You speak about us being divine. We've done things that are incredible as humans, and we're still, I think, we're still not there on things of humanity. How is that? Do you know?
I wish I could say something that had a semblance of wisdom about it, but I honestly cannot. I think it has been with humanity from its outset. There are people who are simply evil, and the righteous among the Earth's population has to stand up and deal with it and fight it constantly. It's what President Kennedy said, if eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, the price of decency, the price of being a real human being. Being a human being is extremely difficult. In a sense, God has it easy. Try being a human being. It's very difficult. And unfortunately, over the millennia, we have seen people succumb to their darker sides. We're wrestling today in this country with that issue, precisely that issue. And I personally believe that the good people will triumph, but it will not be without a sustained and deep struggle.
Wow. Wow. History does repeat itself. We don't learn from history, do we? We get informed, but we don't learn. Yeah, your 1958 yearbook talked about the achievements this Jewish boy had made coming from a family that we just described, growing up in a family heritage that we just described. And I'm going to read part of what it says here. It says that your 1958 yearbook at Bennett High School in Buffalo, New York, described as thus: President of the senior class, President of the student council, President of the Buffalo Inner High School Student Council, Representative of the Empire Boys State, Associate Editor of the School Yearbook, Chief Consul of the senior class, member of the Bennett High School Hall of Fame, member of the Legion of Honor, Key Club, French Honorary Society, cross-country team, track team. My son was cross-country and track, and prom king. Wow. You say that those 7 years that preceded that have been filled with sunlight, love, friendships, vibrancy, and to your own mind, an enormous accomplishment. And then what happened?
And then the fates decided that I was going to go down another path in life. I lost my eyesight in my junior year at Columbia, which was something I obviously could never have imagined, and denied it all during the time that my sight became increasingly darker. So whereas I felt I was on a path toward achieving my goals, which were going to be in public service, I found myself facing people who were telling me that the 2 or 3 options I had were making screwdrivers or caning chairs, or perhaps, if I was really fortunate, becoming a justice of the peace.
Well, I am so grateful that you became who you are. You talk about all your learning not coming from the classroom, though, in your book. And family, you're going to hear me say this over and over. You've got to get this book. Hands down, this is the best book I've read during the time closed up in COVID. And most of my family know that I am, Mr. Greenberg, a voracious reader.
Sandy is fine.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm going to enjoy that. I'm going to enjoy that point of relationship. Thank you. I don't feel I've earned it, but I will enjoy it as a gift. Sandy, I'm a voracious reader. Forbes, I think they counted several thousands of books in my home, and my daughter just made an offer that was accepted on a house 3 minutes walk from me, which is a blessing to me. And the first thing she said she wanted to take was some of my books. And this is an adult child who I would give anything in the world to. And I paused a bit and said, which ones? And she went, Mom, really? But, I love them. I write in them. And in your book, you talk about so many things that touch me, but I believe teach all. One of the things that you gave me a smile with is when you said, and you referred to it as your shadow education. And I teach a lot of people about shadow mentoring. So, just the wording got me. But then you go on to talk about and the white bucks that kids were wearing. And I'm thinking back then, Pat Boone, right?
Yeah.
But
it gave me away.
Yes, it did. You give a lot away. I'm grateful to you. But you do talk about not just that regulation uniform for the Ivy Leaguers. You talk about a friend walking with you and a friend asking you when you were walking back from a class to stop and look at a certain patch of grass. And I thought, wow, I was inspired. I wanted to write a poem entitled A Certain Patch of Grass. You teach so much in that. I will not do that. I would feel it was plagiarism of the idea and the lesson, but it certainly was poetic to me. Tell our family about that certain patch of grass.
Well, I met this young man dressed as you have described him during my freshman orientation week in college. And for reasons of chemistry, I believe, we connected pretty close to the time we met. And we attended a number of classes together. And one day, he and I were walking out of our humanities class, and he called me over and he said, Sanford, I want you to look at this patch of grass. I want you to look at it seriously, implying, of course, that it was simply a measly patch of grass. He then proceeded to tell me how light illuminated the beauty and complexities of its colors. And I was breathless because all of my other friends were talking about politics, homework, dating, sports. And here was a young man my age. We were both 17 years old at the time. And he was talking about the beauty that can be found in nature. And I believe that was a signal moment. And I also believe that it was more than just about nature. I think it was how we actually can experience life. And it changed my way of looking at the world.
You say that a dreamer's world is the secret hideaway. Do you think you were yet a dreamer at that point?
Oh, yes. I'm two parts, as I say in the book. I'm a doer and a dreamer. I've been a dreamer my entire life, and I became a doer after I got my education.
Well, this dreamer friend of yours went on to join a fraternity that was rival to yours.
Yes.
Now, we've seen a lot of hazing. We've seen a lot of incidents where frat boys get into trouble. At my son's school, University of Southern California, when he attended, I believe his frat got shut down, not just disciplined for behavior. So we see a lot of things that happen, but some good things happen too. And when you talk about the importance of, no, let me reframe that. When you talk about how strongly your friend felt that you guys should stay friends, even in rival fraternities, my mind immediately went, and you've just finished telling us, here's a dreamer while others are talking about politics. Your dreamer friend has sent me political thoughts, as have you quite often. And my mind went to, wow, you can join different parties and stay friends, even build stronger friendships. Talk a little bit about that, how it was for you guys as just fellows.
Well, after that experience, our conversations took a different turn because we began exploring the world in a very different way. We spent countless hours going to museums and libraries. He was an architecture student, and I loved art. I started drawing as a little boy and couldn't get enough of New York City, its pleasures in music and in art.
He said he wanted you to stay friends, and he said he was going to give you 5 reasons. He said, your nobility, your devotion to pursuing a lifetime of study of music, the arts, and literature. And he talked about how you're going to find beauty in all corners of life, and your ability to do that was a passion he shared with you. He asked you to form a pact with him that one would come to the other's rescue if you ever found yourself in extreme circumstances. And then he gave you your 5th reason. He said, because you're cool. And you explained in the book, which is appropriate for some of my young friends, that cool was really cool back then. It was a really good thing. Well, Sandy, you really are a cool guy. I mean, there's not a single page in your book I don't learn from, but I also am able to learn some really strong lessons and read strong occurrences that have that overtone of light from you. Your book is Hello Darkness. I got so much light and enlightenment from you. How does that happen from this son of a junk dealer?
I don't know. I just know that the gift of life is sacred. And in fact, one of the reasons I wrote that book is because I believe that each of us, if we accept the gift of life, then we are obligated to account for it. And I believe further that one ought to make the accounting in writing because that forces precision.
Wow. Early in my relationship with my husband, and my husband's picture is right over my left shoulder now. He's an angel over a lot of the decisions and a lot of the occurrences at my desk. He passed away in August of 2020 of Alzheimer's. And early in our relationship, we had a wonderful life for over 40 years. Early in our relationship, he asked me if I would write affirmations as a new immigrant to California from North Carolina, which is really funny because later our children would ask, when are they going back to America when they go down deep south? It felt so different from their experiences. But he asked me to do affirmations. He said that there was so much in me I couldn't get to because I was still so burdened by the things that had already happened. And so he would have me write affirmations in the positive. And I've got books and books of affirmations I wrote. I mean, what you're telling me, as well as what I've read from you, is helping me to understand, to unpack and organize my own life. And I thought I was a pretty cool chick before I picked up your book. You say something I think that's really cool, and it's just incidental in your book, but I highlighted it. You said fall in South Harlem, and that's the location of Columbia, though it's seldom mentioned by real estate brokers or the university's recruitment corps, is usually still warm and humid. And I took so much from that one statement It's seldom mentioned by real estate brokers or the university's recruitment corps. Columbia being in South Harlem. Talk about that. Why was it important for you to make that little footnote in the context of a much larger conversation?
You're the first person who's commented on that. Well, I think that we were living in a bifurcated world. And at that time, Harlem was a very deprived sector of New York City. And here I was luxuriating on the campus of Columbia University, one of the great universities of the world, enclosed with these grand libraries and statues of great people. And it seemed to me that there was a profound degree of unfairness in that. My friend, Jerry Spire, who became another roommate, and I and some others would go to the Apollo Theater for evenings of entertainment. And then it went into a state of disrepair. And Jerry was responsible for bringing it back to life some years ago. Mm. And I remember the opening night when it reopened, and the star of the show was Cab Calloway. Mm-hmm. And it was just a spectacular evening. And it highlighted the fact that there is as much beauty and life in Harlem as there was on Morningside Heights. And so I was very conscious of the distinction between the neighborhoods. And so I didn't think anybody would ever pick that up, but you did. And that my words stand behind what I was saying in that one sentence.
It's incredible. And it's incredible, you know, every coin has four sides. And it's incredible, particularly when you consider the currency that you engaged of what people today call white privilege, to go into that community and be a part of it instead of study in that community and be apart from it. We see the same thing at many of our universities. I serve on the Women's Leadership Board housed in the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And Harvard is campused so close to people who don't have. And I mentioned earlier my son's university, University of Southern California. And one of the reasons that I became such a fan of the school wasn't because of the education it offered our daughter, who needed to go to university at age of 13. Wow. Well, that's why she was there instead of Harvard, is because we wanted her close to home. You know, she was not yet a woman in the biological sense of the word, enough to be away from home. And she had come to me and asked, why was she being punished when we were thinking about her going off to Harvard? We had family there who could visit. And I determined then that her gift would not be treated as a curse. So we opted for USC. But I wasn't completely pleased with the decision until the then president, a couple of years later, made a decision to integrate USC more into the community that surrounded it. My own executive aide had grown up, she said in her words, less than 10 minutes walk from USC, but she never dreamed of going there. It was never something she thought she would achieve. And so when you wrote about that, it touched me deeply. And I have pored over so many of your words in the book. You even talk about when you went back to Buffalo for your cousin Edith's wedding. and how you memorized and yet still stood up and mimicked to read. And I asked myself, why did he mimic to read when he could memorize and do it so well? Why was it important to you to mimic to read?
It's basically what I said earlier, that I was denying. That was on the way toward complete blindness. That was in November, prior to the January of the following year that I lost my eyesight completely.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want anybody, including my girlfriend or my parents or siblings, to see that I was in a rather terrible state of disrepair in terms of my vision.
And even your professor didn't want to believe it when you were seated doing an exam, and you told him, you got up after frustratingly not being able to complete your responses, and told him you were having an issue, and he simply sent you to, was it the dean's office? He sent you. He said,
yes,
yeah.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
That was awesome. Go ahead, please tell us what happened.
Well, my college roommate, who I referred to showing me the patch of grass, a young man named Art Garfunkel, at the time was a little skeptical about what was really happening. I think that was just a surface emotion, but he took me to the gymnasium for my final exam of the end of my first semester of my junior year. And he sat me down in the middle of the room with my blue book, and I put my coat on the back of my chair, and I squinted and somehow was able to get the essence of the essay questions. And I sat down with my blue ballpoint pen and ignored the blue lines in the examination booklet and just wrote feverishly for about an hour. And finally, I wanted to see what time it was. And so I looked down at my watch and I saw absolutely nothing.
Mm.
I blinked, I rubbed my eyes, and nothing changed that fact. And it took me a couple of minutes of being stunned by that fact. But at the end of those few minutes, I felt I had no choice and walked to the front of the room to hand in my examination booklet. And the proctor there looked at me and said, after I had told him my circumstance, and he said, "You know, son, I've heard so many incredible stories, but this tops them all. You understand, don't you, that you're going to be graded on what you're handing me?" And I listened and I said, I'd like to excuse myself. I need to go see my doctor. And he continued to laugh and disregard anything I said until I was determined to get my coat and leave the room. And when he saw me falling over other students who were continuing to write, he finally got me to the dean's office, and they offered to let me dictate the remainder of my exam. And I demurred. I said, "Please, I'd like to go back to my room and pack and go home to Buffalo to see my doctor." And after a bit of a tussle, he agreed to let me go back and had somebody take me back to the room, where I hastily packed up all my books. Of course, that was silly, but I didn't know the future. Mm-hmm. And my clothes. And my friend Arthur took me to Grand Central Station And I took that long train ride home, which, as you know, I describe in the first chapter of the book.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you do. And you also progress in the book to talk about, and this is after, now, when I read what Justice Greenberg said, she described you as brainy and athletic. I mean, you were the big man on campus. Everything. You were the guy who I would have been going after. Let's be clear, okay? And then you go to see Dr. Sugar, and he uses something called an electronic tomograph machine, advanced technology then. And with a name like Sugar, he delivered the bitterest pill, I think, of all. He and you know, we live in a world of hashtags. Hashtag, you're gonna be blind tomorrow. Him telling you that did something that was different than you experiencing that. And I think there's a lesson in there, and I don't want to be assumptive that what it meant to me is what you intended us to know. But you get a doctor named Sugar giving you a really bitter pill to swallow. And the difference in hearing it than experiencing it. You said you got enraged and clenched your fist. What happened then?
Recognizing that my mother was sitting by my side, I suppose that my life just was drained out of me. I sat there holding my stomach, which was in severe pain, and unable to comprehend what he had just said because I didn't want to believe what he just said. And he kept talking and talking, and I didn't hear a word he said, except when he told me that we have to operate tomorrow on both eyes. He doesn't like to operate on both ordinarily, but my situation is so severe that he had to. And then he just walked out of the room, and I was left there sitting silently next to my mother, who, of course, I couldn't see. And I could only imagine what she was going through. But that only lasted a moment because I was then adrift. And I'm not sure that I was living for several moments thereafter. I did everything I could to get back to the hotel that my mother and I were staying in. And after that, it was a very rapid ride downward.
You said that when he announced to you that he was going to perform something called, you'd have something performed on you called a bilateral trephination. He spoke really loud. He as though you were deaf. Right. And he hadn't been doing that. And then I infer from the book, when he's talking to you now and he's determined you are a blind person and you're going to have a surgery, this very sophisticated surgery, he needed to say it louder. You wouldn't get it.
Get it. That has lasted my entire life. My wife and I had to go see a dentist when we were on vacation once, and we walked into his office and he simply wouldn't talk to me because I was blind. And so he had the entire conversation with my wife. And this happens not infrequently.
There are so many injustices that people give, and I have witnessed them in a way that I think encourages my championship for better circumstances. My girlfriend, Lorraine Arbis's family, were ABC family. And her mom did a lot of work through their foundation for cerebral palsy. Do you remember Jerry Lewis Telethon?
I sure do.
And her mom was behind a lot of that. And she went to DC to fight so that we would have what are now evolved ADA regulations, regulations that support that. We have ramps on sidewalks, and we have accommodating bathrooms in hotels. She said her family could afford to stay in any hotel they wanted, but Howard Johnson, I believe, was the only one that would allow them to take her handicapped, quote unquote, daughter, a sister, into a restaurant because they felt it made others uncomfortable.
Oh my God.
And so, you know, this is a dear friend of mine. And when I witness these things, and then I couple them with the experiences I have simply because the handicap of my skin color, yeah, I'm very motivated when I read a book like yours, where you are living a life that defies the impression one would have of us as circumstances change, or even if we're born with certain circumstances that might not fit inside of how we've established normal to be. And that's the big point I think I'm being a bit Southern in making, that I get from your book. It really resonates with me because, and later in the book, you talk about not wanting the cane, you know, not wanting the dog. We're not there yet in the book, but it just really made my heart pound when you did that, when you talked about that, because for some that is a choice. And I don't think you denied them that choice, but you chose not to allow how we've defined normal to impact how you live normal. And that was a big clarion cry for me. I got to tell you, I was going to say, Mr. Greenberg, you've given me Sandy. I got to tell you, Sandy, that was beautiful for me to see how you have stood up. In your book, on page 71, you write something that gives me quite a COVID analogy, what we're experiencing as we have gone through COVID and prayerfully we're coming out of. You write, there is a moment that occurs at least once in just about everyone's life, and all too commonly several times, the instant just after bad news has been given, when you suddenly look back on your life and say, my God, I did not realize how nice I had it until now. As I write this, I'm trying to think whether that one day at the doctor's office in Detroit really was my worst day. If death outweighs everything, then the day my father died should claim that dubious honor. But I was very young then, and able to get on with a life of normal hopes and dreams. Normal hopes and dreams. The gods hadn't yet raised me up so they could bring me low. That was such a COVID analogy for me. And while COVID, for those of us who are surviving and some thriving through it, did not go the depths of it, I don't think any of us escaped knowing that was the case. Thank you for that analogy. And have I got it right?
Yes, you have it precisely right.
You talk about Victory at Sea being a nice record, and then you go on to say it's more meaningful than you can ever imagine. That's what you're writing what Hoffman said. And You said the idea of victory has been on my mind these past days, but not just victory for me. I made a deal with God. If he gets me out of this hole, I'll do everything I can to prevent others from going through grief like this in the future. How do we continue that COVID analogy? A lot of us have gone through it, and I'm curious if we're going to learn from it. And so I'm asking you to, kind of tie the lessons of your book into what you can teach us as we exit COVID.
Well, I can't I don't think I'm really qualified to give an opinion that would be meaningful. I can just tell you the way I look at the world. And to me, a lot about how we live life is about the philosophy we develop, the perspective, the attitude. Einstein writes that the most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious.
Wow.
It is the fundamental emotion which stands at the true cradle of art and science. Whoever does not know it can no longer wonder, can no longer marvel, is as good as dead, and his eyes are dim. And to me, in the first instance, each of us has the opportunity to wonder, to marvel. Because if you don't, you miss the magic of daily living, the magnificent, gargantuan essence, the beauty and the joy that can be uncovered within all things we encounter on a daily basis. Going on.
You know, Sandy, you're faithful to that thought. You're faithful to that. May I call it a truth? You're faithful to that truth. And you really touched me. And I won't keep reading everything you said, but if you could see the book that I have in front of me, wow, you would tell me I have to go get another one to keep it clean. But you write on page 81, Britain was boosting its arms budget. Castro hoped to reestablish friendly relationships with the United States, provided we stop arming his enemies. A mob had attacked the Soviet embassy in Belgium, and you'd hear people discussing what was going on in the world, trying to make conversation, and all you'd be thinking was, the world is still out there? And then you turn around and chastise yourself for thinking such a self-centered thing, for thinking that because you could not see something, it was not happening at all. And I got to tell you, I'm not going to analogize everything you wrote, but I've had so many of my white friends tell me they didn't know what was going on for Black people and police because they hadn't seen it. And I thought, wow, here is a person whose sight is gone and whose vision is stronger than ever. And you coming back to yourself and chastising yourself. What does that do for your character enhancement? It says a lot about your character. What does it do for your character enhancement? And how can other people learn from that, regardless of what their state of blindness is?
I think that, and I'm guilty of this as well, I think we're all too self-centered. William Lichtenberg wrote a book called The Perils of Prosperity many, many decades ago. And I think materialism has led in some corners to people just wanting more and more and more for themselves, for me, and not thinking about the other person. And so I caught myself in that one moment and felt that I shouldn't be thinking that.
Well, that's powerful, because my daughter Kay and I were talking the other day about something very similar to that. I mentioned to you she's just bought a house, and well, she's just made an offer that was accepted. And we were talking about it because she said, I want the comfort of that little piece of land. And I don't know if you know the song, The Folks Who Live on the Hill, but I played that song for her, you know. And she said, I just want that little piece that's decent and safe and green. I can see the sky. And all they want, the realtors wanted to show her were really big and lavish homes. And I don't dismiss those for people who want that. We don't know where their points of need are, that's important. But I felt such a pride in her for wanting that. And she was the one who reminded me of this from your book. By the way, did I mention we shared this book in my home? So thank you. But she said, when you talked about knowing that you had talent and determination, and that the gifts of those, plus the support of your family, asking yourself, could it be enough? You said your family had a tradition of a nagging uneasiness about good fortune. And while it was subtle, they were always a little bit uncertain and thought that good fortune might be illusory. And that was important to her because, you know, she has a friend who's going through some of those nagging thoughts while things are looking up for them. They're a little bit scared to be happy because happy may not last. They're a little bit more influenced by the rough road, and they're young, Sandy, the rough road they've had till now, that they're a little uncomfortable that things could be getting better for them. But you asked yourself if your life's purpose was simply to serve as a reminder that bad things could happen during that time. What is the answer you got?
Well, it's a longer, I have too long an answer, so I'll try and truncate it. From my perspective, and I can certainly understand your daughter's perspective, Jewish history has been filled with significant amount of suffering. And we are always wary of such good fortune because we are aware, based upon our experiences, that it could easily disappear. So the struggle I have, and I can't speak for anyone else, is to separate out those concerns with focusing in on precisely the moment that things are going very well and enjoying them.
I think that's such a compliment to God, to learn to enjoy in the moment. And it's a confidence in life that's coupled without fearing the future. Stuff's gonna happen. But your book is just resonant with how you have been able to not let stuff get in the way of essence. And I'm so grateful you shared this. Your friend Arthur thought it was his job to convince you to go back to school.
Yes.
You said he sang you something, and gosh, I wish I had been able to hear it. I won't try to sing it, but I'll read what he sang to you. Oh, Sanford, 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 I made you out of clay, and now you're dry and ready. So Sanford, we must play. Okay, Sandy, you know you got to talk about that.
in the Jewish religion, the holiday of Hanukkah is populated by a variety of joyous songs, one of which revolves around a small metallic instrument that's hard to describe. It's called a dreidel.
Dreidel, yes.
And you spin it around, and where it lands, depending on what Hebrew letter you get, will determine what your good fortune is. And so the dreidel song is oh, dreidel, dreidel, dreidel.
Mm-hmm.
and he changed it to, oh, Sanford, Sanford,
Yes.
Sanford. And this is his particular, what I call crooked humor. And it definitely has broke the tension in that walk, but he's been doing that, and I've been doing it with him for 60 years now, and it's been wonderful. It's really one of the most delightful things of life, because while we take things very seriously, we also know that there are moments of lightness and humor in the human condition, and we sometimes poke fun at it.
Yeah, my people, my community, and my family, we've learned to laugh in spite of things, not because of them, in spite of them. And I remember being a child and hearing my mother and father, when they would teach us, they saved so hard to get us encyclopedia. And mom would get excited when the next one would come, because she couldn't buy the whole set. So she'd buy them one at a time. And there was a Jewish man named Mr. Brogdon who would drive through our community. Mind you, Sandy, I couldn't go downtown and try on stuff. When I was a little girl, you couldn't try on shoes and things. And so this man saw indignity in that. So he brought the store to us, and we could try on things. But he also facilitated mom getting the encyclopedia. And we just loved it so much when we would get the books. And I remember mom saying, everything you want to know about life is not in an encyclopedia. And they would teach us things. And one of the things that stands out for me that she and daddy taught us was that, when we sing, because my mom would sing all the time, beautiful, beautiful voice. And she'd sing through work. If something was bad or somebody got a boo-boo, she'd sing to them. That was her medicine. And she said, when slaves would sing on plantations, very rarely were they singing for joy. Those were songs of hope. They were message songs, but they were also medicine songs. And you'd sing your way through when you couldn't see your way. Well, Arthur did that with you again, and it another emotional moment for me in your book. I thought of my husband was when he said to you abruptly he wanted you to recite, "Oh, to be in England now that April's there." And whoever, do you remember writing that? It blew me away.
Yeah, that was a Browning poem that
yes.
he quoted in order to tell me how beautiful my hometown of Buffalo was, comparing
yes.
it to England.
Yes, I had to laugh, Sandy, because my husband used to recite that all the time. My husband is from England, from Yorkshire.
Is that right?
Yes. And I read that and I wrote in the book, Bernie, Bernie, Bernie.
That is fantastic story.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thanks for sharing that one with me. That'll stick with me. You can be sure.
But you did respond with something that meant a lot. You said, "Just give me one more day in the sunshine." That's what you're talking about Achilles, remember?
Yeah, I sure
Just
do.
give me one more day in the sunshine, Arthur. That's all I ask. Well, I don't know if you consider, Sandy, that you've gotten sunshine, but you brought it to us. You certainly have. And whether it's through the support of your friend Arthur, who you call your teacher, or whether it's simply through your own grit or combination formula that you're still brewing, I just don't know. But I'm so grateful for it. I want to progress a little bit, though, because, and this is just for me, I mean, our family listening, if they're interested, great. But you talk about when Carl snapped at you after you were having the discussion about going back to school, yes. And he referred to you as Duvid, and you said that's your middle name in Yiddish. Was that something your family did when they were serious, or it was really important to call your middle name?
Yes. it was a call to pay attention to what I'm saying.
That's exactly what happened in my family. If my mother was serious about something, if somebody was in trouble or something big was happening, and she gave me her name as my middle name, Elretha. If my mother says Janice Elretha, I jump to attention. When I read that you were doing that, it really, really blew me away.
That's a great story.
You also talk about in the book the possibility for success, not just ordinary success, like safety. You talk about, even if it extends to material success, the importance of enjoying all the things that somebody has the time to enjoy fully. Another COVID moment, another lesson, teach it. Enjoying, the importance of enjoying fully everything you can in the moment.
Yes, that seems to be, in a way, almost the essence of what God has given us. These singular moments that come, and I think that supersedes all other concerns. And, you know, a lot of people live with fear. And it seems to me that if you are able to really enjoy the singular, glorious moments that you're given, you erase fear. You set it aside because there's more important things to do. And I also think that if you have a mission, something you're dedicated to fully, that will also set aside fear. And that's one of the big emotions we all face. And once I got through the subway odyssey, which Arthur arranged for me, I say in the book that all fear vanished. And by that, I mean that I was so busy surviving and dreaming and trying to fulfill those dreams that fear had nothing to do with that. I had no time to pay attention to fear. I treated it with the disdain it deserves.
Wow. You know, my daughter said after we shared the story of the subway odyssey, she said, Mom, you know, it would be really great. I don't know that schools own the responsibility to do it, but it would be really great if families, when their children are growing up, would teach them around the importance of embracing the darkness, not fearing it. She said she believes that it would not just build strength of character, but it would build strength of purpose. And she said something so simple as sharing the darkness with your children. She said, how many times do you think parents turn out the lights and then walk out and leave the child alone? And the only way the child finds light is to crawl through the darkness back to mommy or daddy's bed. She said she thinks that there must be some way for us to teach people not to fear dark. She thinks it's universal that people fear the dark. I know that when I met my husband, he shared that a friend of his had worked with Ray Charles and how Ray Charles had learned to live in the darkness at a very young life, and the work he did to create light from that darkness. You really put a lot for my daughter and me in this book. I can hardly wait for my son to share it with us. You gave us another COVID moment because you talked about earning higher grades after the blindness than before. You
Yes.
talked about simple things like turning back textbook pages, becoming painfully intricate tasks when they're on a tape recorder. You said, but it was worth it. And you started to feel as though you were winning.
Yes.
Well, when you were doing that, what happened though to get the better grades? Was it because of what you just shared with us about living fully in the moment? Were you studying better? Did you feel a more intentional purpose, or what happened that you became a better student?
Well, I think I mentioned it earlier that after I was liberated, so to speak, I had the world in front of me. And that meant I could now exclusively pay attention to the next task at hand. And that was finishing up my education. And I that's why I think it blots out all of the fear and other emotions that only tend to compromise yourself.
Well, your friend Arthur came in with that copy of the New York Times that the article had been written about you and the success you were having as a student. And you rejected it as being a good article. You said you didn't want to be known, and I paraquote you, being good for a blind person. And I so feel you on that, Sandy. I've many times had people refer to me as successful or outstanding for a Black person or for a colored girl when I integrated the 11th grade. Did it put a ridge on your back to have that? What was the thing of it for you?
I guess this is my own problem, but I felt that when I lost my eyesight, I lost my dignity. And so I did at the time, and do to this moment, try to avoid looking like or actually losing my dignity. And to be called, as I say in the book, Sandy Greenberg, the blind guy, is to me demeaning. It's similar to what you were just talking about. You are successful as a Black person. You are successful as a human being, damn it. And that's that. And unfortunately, there is a substantial amount of prejudice toward blind people. And that's in part why 70% of the blind Americans are unemployed. And that's certainly before COVID. I can't imagine what it is today, because we have, and perhaps it's similar to yourself, we have embedded in our culture these terrible images, starting with Oedipus and going through Tiresias. And people think, that the blind are the damned, they're lost, there's victims of their own sins. And the examples I just gave you lead people to believe that blindness is to be frightened about, and also to have people who are blind discounted, because of course they can't read, so how can they do anything of value? So it's a problem. That's one of the reasons why I went into business, because in business, it doesn't matter what color, what stature, what disability you have. It's simply the bottom line. It's the great meritocracy in the end. So people have invested in me, not because I was blind, I can assure you of that, but because I had an idea or a set of ideas that they thought were worthy of exploring and had substantial upside.
People have invested in you, their political capital as well. Margaret Mead became absolutely infuriated when she picked up her phone and was being told by Princeton.
Yeah.
Tell that story. That really, I mean, I laughed out loud at that. It was beautiful for me and Margaret Mead of all people.
Right. Well, Margaret Mead was just an extraordinary woman. I mean, I saw her, this is in the 50s now, operating as a woman in a purely male-dominated world, particularly anthropology and in her own field. But I was told by many people that I should not apply to major league graduate schools. And I decided that I wanted to. And I thought if I applied to many, maybe, just maybe, there'd be one shot at getting into a really first-rate school in the field of government. So I applied to Wisconsin, Chicago, Cornell, Princeton, Columbia, Yale, Harvard. And I was with President Eisenhower at a meeting because he was president, before he became president of the United States. He was president.
You didn't know if you wanted to meet him at first, did you? You say you weren't sure.
Right, that's true. But I will tell you, it was a real blessing for me to have met him. And he inspired me in a way that no one else could have, because I knew, standing as I was clasping his hand, that this was one of the great men of our time, given the way in he dealt with Normandy and World War II. And he told me, I don't know how he knew this, but he knew that I was going through some tough times in school. And his bottom line, he said, I went through languishing for 17 years, and many of my colleagues laughed at me because I was still stuck in the military while they were going out to business and making a lot of money. But I had confidence in myself. And he taught me that in order to succeed and become yourself, you have to have confidence in yourself. And that inspiration lasted for a little while, because when I got back to my dormitory that evening, Arthur read me the first letter I received from all the graduate schools I applied to was from Princeton, and it was a flat out rejection. And I didn't know what to do, because I assumed naturally that all the other schools in that same league would not accept me either. So Margaret Mead, who had written letters of recommendation for me, she originally was my anthropology teacher my sophomore year, and then later she asked me if I would want to become her research assistant, which I said yes, because she did not believe that blindness was a handicap. So she had a blind guy as a research assistant. One of the many, many reasons why she was an extraordinary human being. In any event, I took the letter to her office and she read it. And before she had finished reading it, she picked up the phone to the dean of the graduate school at Princeton and started screaming at him and telling him that there is no reason that you should have declined denied Greenberg acceptance. But
she told them their books weren't any harder than anybody else's, didn't she?
yes, ma'am.
Oh
Yes,
my goodness. And then Professor Cantor encouraged you to go on and become a Rhodes Scholar, yes?
Yeah, a Marshall Scholar, yeah.
You became the Marshall Scholar. Yeah.
Right. No, the Professor Cantor was an extraordinary friend. He taught me British constitutional history, and he would always say to me, I met him early in my junior year, and he said, you know, son, if you want to be an educated man, you have to go to Oxford. and I thought that was quite an elite and obnoxious sentence. But I kept that to myself, and we continued to talk over that period of time. He originally wanted me to apply for a Rhodes Scholarship because he himself had been a Rhodes Scholar. And it turned out by the time, and then Detroit intervened, and by the time it was my senior year, since I was planning to marry Sue, I couldn't apply to the Rhodes Scholarship for a Rhodes Scholarship because they did not permit people to be married and accept their scholarship. But the Marshall Scholarship people did permit you to be married. And I, at first, told him I'm not going to do it. I couldn't, because he was talking to me my senior year. And when we got to Cambridge for graduate school, he actually flew up to see me and spend a day with me. And most of the day was about the fact that if I really wanted to be an educated person, I had to go to Oxford. And the best way he thought I should do it is apply for a Marshall Scholarship, which he recommended me for. And it turned out to be an extraordinary experience.
It truly was, as we're talking with you today, the right decision. You talk about the urgency and the momentum with which, the aggression with which work habits form. And you liken the work habits for blind people can sometimes be built from that concern about security. And you said you made an analogy to people growing up during the Great Depression and stockpiling things.
Yeah.
And my daughter reminded me that that was powerful lesson for me to listen to, because I give things to people, but I also keep things. I've got shoes, I've got things that haven't been given away, that haven't been thrown out either, but I've also got emotional and mental baggage that I've not thrown out from lack of security. Tell us what we can know, what you've learned, what you've figured out, how to make it work for you instead of against you, this sense of urgency or desire for security.
Yes, I guess in a sentence, I would say, because there's no easy answer to what you're asking, or at least I can't think of a cogent one that would be helpful. Mm-hmm. I would say simply that you should revel in the glories of life. That's what should occupy your time. That, more than anything else, when you walk outside, do look at that patch of grass, look at the tree, stand still and look upward and look at the clouds and the color of the sky. You know, I once had a doctor when I was 30 years old who was my internist. And as I mentioned in the book, as a little boy, I was petrified of blindness and cancer. Those two horrible specters surrounded me during my formative years. And I went to him and I asked him if he would be kind enough to help me end my life if I got terminal cancer. And he said he would absolutely help me do that. Mm-hmm. And then he said, however, I have a number of patients who have terminal cancer, and they struggle and fight every day for every inch of life.
Mm. Well, so, I got it.
Go on, I'm sorry.
I want to hear what you were going to say, please.
No, I think that it made a lasting impression on me. And so I have an advantage that I don't have any visual distractions, as Justice Ginsburg pointed out in her foreword. So I populate my mind with ideas that are beautiful. Physicists and mathematicians often talk about the beauty of a theorem. I populate my mind by thinking about some of the great art I used to look at, and some of the great art I have acquired over the years, and some of the great moments in my life, and those become dominant.
Sandy, you say that you came to the conclusion that the only really worthwhile things in the world are people and ideas, and you liken that to why the Western intellectual tradition, for which the Parthenon stands as a symbol, has meant so much to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about it. What else is there other than people and ideas? I can't think of anything that is as meritorious, as worthwhile as people or ideas. That has certainly been my experience in life. And ideas are absolutely extraordinary. I think to me the headline is "Revel in the Glories of Life." I never said that in my life before until you asked the question. And my life is certainly that. I mentioned in the book that I'm the luckiest guy in the world.
Yeah.
And I personally believe that's true. I have a golden place in life with my family and friends, and with the many other people that I get to meet along the way. And it's just beyond extraordinary.
One question before we go to 4 for 4. You mentioned in the book, Sandy, about working as a staffer in the White House. And by the way, thank you for that service. You say that one tends to lose innocence working in the White House. And you also said sometimes it can engulf you. I'm paraquoting you, that it can engulf you and all you think about, all you do is that world in the White House. What is it about that? Is it the big things, the big ideas, the big issues that you're working on there? Is it the glory, the fame, and how we built the White House up to the level of a Parthenon? What is it that happens to people?
I think it happens to people for different reasons. What I found, just to be repetitive, is the people I met were extraordinary, simply extraordinary people who were, for the most part, dedicated and devoted to the country. And the ideas that came by me, either in memoranda on my desk or in meetings with many of these people, it's intoxicating. It just is. Because
it's a hard journey to get there, isn't it?
It sure is. But that's where all the major decisions are made that affect our lives. And I was working for a man, President Lyndon Johnson, who it is true he bobbled the war. I'm fully aware of that.
And you were a Kennedy guy, you said, working for Johnson.
I'm sorry, what was your question?
You say you were a Kennedy guy working for Johnson.
Yes, it's true. I was President Kennedy had so inspired me to go into public service. And then I met him briefly, but I also knew his two brothers, Bobby and Teddy, pretty well. And as you know, there was no love lost between Bobby Kennedy and President Johnson. So there was another man named Fred Harris, who was a senator from Oklahoma, a spectacular man. And it was written about him in the Times that he was the only person in town that could have breakfast with Hubert Humphrey, lunch with Lyndon Johnson, and dinner with Bobby Kennedy. And I knew those three men pretty well, Humphrey, Bobby, and President Johnson, each of whom affected my life dramatically. So I could write volumes about that experience, but a lot of what I learned there is never to be repeated. Because it was wartime, I learned things I never wanted to learn or know about. And it was very disturbing. And in fact, that year, I struggled with whether to stay in government to pursue my career or leave government and go into the private sector. And as I learned more and more about the war, and as I talked to Vice President Humphrey and Secretary Willard Wirtz and Bill Moyers and Orville Freeman, people who joined me when I set up my first company, I realized that I couldn't in good conscience stay and support the war. As insignificant as my contribution would be, still it was a big decision in my life. And so I decided that it was time to prove myself in the real world. And so I went out and started my own company and built it, as well as a number of others, with the extraordinary help of some of the most wonderful people I've ever met.
You met Von Braun during that time too.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. One of the task force I worked on was we were doing a space report to the President of the United States, and it started when I first got there, and it was due on the President's desk the following June. And as I became more immersed in what was happening at NASA, which actually at the time was in a bit of a muddle, I realized how central Braun had been to our war effort and getting to space. And I knew that he had that he actually worked for the Nazis. And as I said to you, having been covered by stories about the Holocaust, I wanted to meet him to see if I could understand what caused Germany and Hitler, whom he knew, what was it that drove them to the insanity they pursued. Of course, as you might imagine, and as I mentioned in the book, not a word about that was ever spoken between von Braun and me. We talked about science and technology, the space program, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and everything but that, which was disappointing. But
well, we're going to go to 4 for 4. Before we do, you've got to share with people, and thank you for answering my questions today. There's so many more I have, but you've got to be able to tell us about End Blindness. I introduced it to our family in the introduction of you, but no one can speak it as well as you.
Well, it was a promise I made to God. It's as simple as that. During the 60s, when I left the hospital, I had to try and figure out how I was going to recover and build a life for my wife and me, and subsequently our children. And as I looked around the world, the scientific world, which I had fortunately good access to, the progress in terms of ending blindness was nowhere near in sight. It took decades, and until the beginning of this century did I feel that there was an opportunity to do something as audacious as ending the scourge itself. And by 2012, Sue and I decided that this was the time to pose a challenge to the most brilliant minds of our generation and say, we want to give $3 million to the person or persons who contributes most to ending blindness by the year 2020. And we had a awards ceremony on December 14th of this year, which originally was supposed to be held in the Supreme Court because of Justice Ginsburg, but unfortunately her untimely passing prevented that. And so we did it, we streamed it around the world, and if you want to listen to it, it'll give you better history, www.endblindness2020.com. It's not a commercial. There's nothing commercial about it. It's simply furthering our interests. And now Johns Hopkins approached us, and they are in the process of creating something called the Sanford and Susan Greenberg Center to End Blindness, which will be the only facility in the world devoted solely to ending blindness for everyone forevermore.
And we are putting the website up as well with this podcast for this very valuable, humane work. And we also are excited to join in the effort in our own small way. Shall we go to 4 for 4? Sandy, you told me you're my...
You're the boss.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my God. I'm glad you can't see my face right now. Sandy, so 4 for 4. I'm going to ask you 4 questions to which you'll give me 4 answers to each. You'll give your answers and why. The first question is, you can invite anyone to dinner from any time in life, past or present. Who are you going to invite to your table and why? 4 people.
Well, first, you might have guessed that I would invite Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg to dinner. Fortunately, in real life, she's been to our home for dinner many, many times. And most important is that during the high holy days, they're right before Yom Kippur arrives, the night before we have a dinner for a few friends, including Justice Ginsburg. And after the dinner, we go to temple together, and sitting between Sue and me is Justice Ginsburg, and we pray there together for 2 or 3 hours. And sitting next to her for those hours, praying together, is simply something that has been an irreplaceable memory. So I would love to revisit with her everything that's happened since her demise.
Well, you're making me really proud of my shirt, which I'm lifting up now for all our family to see. I'm wearing a sweatshirt, as I mentioned to you, and it says, "Women belong in all places where decisions are being made." Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it has her face on it. And I wore it in homage to you because she's someone you valued enough to write a foreword to your book. But wow, you've given special meaning to it. Thank you. And that she's a prayerful woman. I speak of her in the present because I think her spirit deserves that respect.
That's very kind and thoughtful. Thank you.
And who are the other three who are coming to dinner?
Winston Churchill, because in my opinion, he saved Western democracy. And if there was ever a person we needed in this country today, it's Winston Churchill.
My husband was a Winston Churchill fan.
Terrific. I'm glad to join him in being such. There are two other people, correct?
Yes.
Well, one of them is William Shakespeare, who was able to write. He wrote as though he were writing the sentences of gods. I can't express it any other way, because it always seemed to me to be impossible to write the way he did.
Mm.
He did. I want to ask him this question. He wrote 155 love sonnets, and I want to know why he stopped.
Mm.
Why didn't he do 156?
Mm-hmm.
Or seven? All right. But I'd also like to understand how he looked at the world and how he was able to encapsulate it in such glowing and powerful words. So I have one more. I'm sorry.
Yeah, who's last at dinner? Or should I say next?
Next. Yeah. No, I would say Kamala Harris, who has intrigued me for many, many years, followed her work in the Senate, and then her elevation to the vice presidency, which is a stunningly wonderful, historic move. And I would like to hear from her directly what her vision is for the future of the United States. Not just a press release, but really what is it you think we ought to accomplish as a nation, and how do you see your role in accomplishing that?
Well, Sandy, you are a keenly smart and humane business person. You're also a bit of a soft old liberal, so.
No, that may be so. If I am, I wear it proudly.
Oh, I love you. I love you. So we're going to go 2 for 4. 4 books, understanding who our family is, primarily 25 to 45 years of age. 4 books you think they must read in their lifetime, and why. And look, I don't allow you to mention the one I'm holding up now, Hello Darkness, My Old Friend. Well, because I've already encouraged that. Guys, you've got to read it. So what are the 4 you're going to recommend?
I suppose the first and most important one is a very short book. It's called Our Town by Thornton Wilder. Everybody knows about it. Has probably read it in high school or college or some other time. But to me and to my friend Arthur, we were sitting on top a concrete lion at Columbia University, the symbol of the university, and we in our sophomore year, and we read it to each other. And it is, in our judgment, a real manual for living. And anyone who reads the entire book, because it starts out slowly, if that person doesn't come away with a deep and profound appreciation for life then that would be very sad.
Mm.
And you ought to read it every 10 years. It takes takes on a different meaning each decade. Second book that I would recommend would be Marcel Proust's Remembrance of Things Past. Unsurpassed writing, brilliant insights, descriptions, for example, of a simple flower that goes on for 3 or 4 pages, and you sit there and listen, as I do, and are breathless after reading the descriptions. If you want to talk about real description of beauty, Proust is your person. The third book is Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale.
Mm.
I have to acknowledge the fact that she is a friend of mine, and despite that, she made the list. She was so prescient in her view of the world when she wrote Handmaid's Tale that it has taken on a life of its own in multiple spaces in our space continuum. And I know her to be a woman of enormous stature and probity and decency. Mm. So it would be a great honor were she to accept my offer. Mm. The final book, I guess I would say Edward Gibbon, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which is, I think, unfortunately, relevant to the times we're living in. But it's written brilliantly and powerfully, and you wonder how he too could have been so prescient. Mm. Mm. Those are my first.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing them. We're going 3 for 4. Now, it's understood by the family by now that you love music. If you're this young white guy running over to Harlem, to the Apollo Theater, and hanging out with one of the greatest, is it safe to say one of the greatest musicians of our lifetime?
You bet.
Then, well, what are you listening to? What 4 artists or music pieces are you listening to, and why?
Well, I mentioned in the book Bach's B minor Mass, but I think more personal would be the concerto for 2 violins in D minor that he wrote, because in it you will recognize that there is a conversation going on, the same conversation that we have with our loved ones, and also it could be seen as conversation that is a national one today that needs to go on. So I would say that's one of the 4. Needless to say, Hello Darkness, My Old Friend, Sound of Silence is another one that has profoundly affected me on so many different ways and so many levels.
Me too, sir. Me too.
So pleased to hear that. And then how could you leave out Ode to Joy? How could anyone ignore that song? And I'll tell you a little story about Beethoven if you have a couple more minutes. Beethoven wrote a letter to his brothers in which he said he was standing next to a man and they were both, quote, listening to a person playing the flute some 20 or 30 feet away. And he said, the man next to me could hear the flute. I heard nothing. And I felt if there were another incident like that, I would take my life. And then he said, but I knew that I had much to give forth to the world in the nature of my art. And quote, and so I endured this wretched life, truly wretched. This from a man who wrote Ode to Joy.
Wow.
And that's sort of a lesson that answers one of your earlier questions. Your life will undoubtedly be filled with difficulties if you're human. Hopefully your life does not become wretched. But despite that, you can still bring music to the world, your own music.
I know you are a Jewish man, but you got me shouting like you a Baptist preacher. Oh, Sandy. Okay, 4 for 4. Let's do it. 4 pieces of advice, which you led into just now. 4 pieces of advice you think are best and critical for our family to have right now. And please, Sandy, let us know if the advice is of your own or if it was some shared with you, because we believe in passing it on and paying it forward.
Let you know what?
If it's your own advice or if it's advice that was shared with you by someone else.
I see. Well, I'll...
4 pieces of advice.
The first, to me, is the most obvious, which is to try and appreciate the inestimable value of your family and your friends. Sounds simple, but also your role models and your mentors. That's a great deal of your university. And if you pay attention, you will derive more than you have already, because we assume a lot of things about our family and friends and our mentors and role models. Secondly, I would say, well, let me tell you about a friend of mine, since you've asked me to give advice that someone else gave me. Jack Kemp was a great quarterback for the Buffalo Bills many years ago. He then became member of Congress and Secretary of HUD.
I met him.
Did you?
On the campaign trail, yes.
Did you really? How fabulous.
Yes, I did.
He was a wonderful man, and he also had the additional virtue of being from Buffalo.
Yes.
Since that's the case, I stopped him one day and I said, Jack, what's your secret of success? And he didn't know what to say at first. He thought about it and said, throw deep. And that has stuck with me all of these years. Another way of saying dream big, because those are the dreams worthwhile pursuing and getting bloodied for. The third piece of advice is to try and understand that a tragic event does not necessarily mean that there will be a tragic outcome.
Wow. Whew. Wow.
And finally, if a blind kid from Buffalo, a junk dealer's son, can do it, anyone can.
Well, again, thank you for allowing me to call you Sandy. Hello Darkness is a song that I have loved so much, and it's tops for a lot of people. That you inspired it is now no longer a secret to many people. Your book, which I'm holding up now with all my notes and sticky notes on it, Hello Darkness, My Old Friend, it's even deeper. I think I love it more than the song. And I thank you for the poetry of it as you wrote it. I thank you for allowing me to call you Sandy, because good sir, you have really touched my life. And I must say in a very positive way. My own darkness around losing my husband has been helped. And I thank you so much. Now, I intentionally didn't lean in the way so many interviews have and so much that's written about you has around your friendship. I haven't even called the last name of your friend because I think he would agree with me that this conversation is about you, that you seeded the idea of bringing darkness to light. And I pray this is not the last time we have conversation. Thank you so much from my heart to your home, Mr. Sanford D. Greenberg, who you've given me the great gift of calling Sandy. Don't you say a good name is worth rubies? You've allowed me to call you by your first. You have truly gifted me. And I know my family is excited from what you've shared with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. I cannot actually thank you enough for your graciousness and your kind words. Thank you.
Guys, you got to get this book. It's changing my life, and I know it's going to be a positive change for you. You will not put it down. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Janice.